Efosa was not the kind of young man anyone would have imagined taking a path into the bloody corridors of cultism. Born into a privileged family in the early 1980s, his childhood stood far apart from the struggles that shaped many of the men who would later stand beside him under the banner of the Black Axe Confraternity. His father was a respected senior civil servant, a man of influence who had climbed the rungs of government bureaucracy with intelligence and persistence. His mother was successful in her business, a disciplinarian but also a nurturer who believed her son would rise to greatness in academics or politics. Efosa grew up in an environment of comfort, chauffeured cars to school, vacations, and a home where books filled entire shelves. His parents believed this foundation would keep him focused, shield him from the distractions that had ruined many promising young men. But like many stories in Nigeria's turbulent 1990s, privilege was no antidote to the allure of power. When he gained admission to the University of Benin in the mid-1990s, Efosa arrived with confidence. He was not intimidated by the sprawling campus, nor by the undercurrents of cultism that many freshmen whispered about. He had heard the tales, how confraternities controlled social life, how they defined masculinity and power, how they influenced elections within the student union, and how they clashed violently over supremacy. At first, Efosa appeared detached. He was the kind of student who dressed well, attracted attention effortlessly. But behind his calm exterior was a mind that admired strength. And soon that admiration turned into association. It did not take long for him to come into contact with Black Axe members. To them he was a natural candidate, strong, wealthy, fearless, and charismatic. Unlike others who joined out of insecurity or poverty, Efosa brought prestige. The cult saw in him not only a soldier but a symbol, the privileged son who had chosen to embrace the brotherhood of violence. His initiation into the Black Axe was swift, and almost immediately his presence was felt on campus. Within a semester, his name had become a whisper on student lips. Whether it was a fight at the school gate, intimidation in the hostels, or a raid on rival confraternities, Efosa's shadow was always there. But with recognition came notoriety. By mid-1990s, numerous cult-related incidents on the University of Benin campus were directly or indirectly linked to him. His rise was meteoric, but it carried the seeds of downfall. By the late 1990s, the University of Benin had already earned a reputation as one of the hotbeds of confraternity activity in southern Nigeria. While the school was a place of learning with departments that produced some of the country's finest academics, it was also a battlefield for groups like the Black Axe, Airlords, Buccaneers, and Vikings. Freshmen were often warned in hushed tones to stay away from the night corners of the hostels, to avoid unnecessary arguments, and never to walk alone after dark. Yet, for all the fear, confraternities had become deeply woven into campus life. They controlled nightlife, electioneering, and even protection systems. Efosa, by then a proud Black Axe man, found himself in the thick of this storm. His charisma and willingness to get his hands dirty made him invaluable to his brothers. Unlike many recruits who were hesitant in their first violent operations, Efosa showed no fear. It was this fearlessness that made him rise fast within the confraternity. The turning point came one rainy evening in mid-1990s. Tensions between the Black Axe and the Airlords confraternity had been building for weeks. A scuffle at a nightclub off campus had escalated into whispers of revenge. The Airlords believed one of their members had been assaulted by Black Axe men. In the logic of cult wars, retaliation was inevitable. Efosa was not one to wait for an attack. He believed in striking first, a philosophy that set him apart. He gathered a group of trusted Black Axe brothers, many of them armed with axes, machetes, and locally made toys. The attack happened swiftly. A group of Airlords were cornered near a hostile block after dark. Screams pierced the night as the Black Axe men descended with brutal efficiency. Windows shattered as terrified students scrambled to escape. By the time security arrived, the attackers had melted away into the shadows of campus. The following day, the University of Benin was in chaos. Rumors spread that Efosa had led the raid. Students whispered his name with fear. Parents began calling their children, urging them to stay indoors. The administration could no longer ignore the violence. Efosa's name surfaced in several student petitions submitted to the vice-chancellor's office. Though he was careful never to be caught directly, his notoriety made him a prime suspect. Pressure mounted as newspapers began reporting cult clashes in Uniben, naming the Black Axe as instigators. Student unions demanded accountability. Parents stormed the school gates, accusing the administration of negligence. The tension was unbearable. Faced with mounting criticism, the university set up a disciplinary panel. Efosa, along with several suspected cultists, was invited to appear. The evidence was circumstantial. No one dared testify directly against him for fear of reprisal, but the weight of public opinion was heavy. In mid-1990s, the verdict came. Efosa and others were expelled from the University of Benin. The announcement shook the entire campus. For Efosa, it was a public humiliation. His parents, who had always believed their son would rise to greatness, were shattered. His father used every influence he could muster, calling in favors, trying to reverse the expulsion. But the university stood firm. The public pressure was too great, and the administration refused to bow. Efosa returned home to Benin City. His once proud parents could barely look at him. His mother wept quietly at night, asking how her brilliant son had chosen such a path. His father, though stern, carried the disappointment like a wound. Yet to Efosa, expulsion was not the end. It was merely a pause. For many students, an expulsion was an execution order for their academic dreams. But Efosa was not just any student. His family's influence and wealth meant doors could be reopened, even after disgrace. After months of silence at home, months where his parents debated his future with anger and sorrow, his father finally pulled strings. By late 1990s, Efosa was admitted into Obafemi Awolowo University, one of Nigeria's most prestigious and turbulent institutions. If Uniben had a reputation for cult clashes, Obafemi Awolowo University was a furnace. The sprawling campus in Eiye was beautiful, but beneath the surface was a war zone of confraternities, Black Axe, Vikings, Buccaneers and Airlords, all competing for dominance. Efosa was stepping from one battlefield into another. When Efosa arrived, he wasted no time in identifying his Black Axe brothers on campus. Cultism in Nigeria often thrived on networks that stretched beyond one university. Once a member of Black Axe, always a member. Wherever you went, there were brothers waiting. At Obafemi Awolowo University, Efosa was welcomed as one of their own. His notoriety at Uniben had traveled ahead of him. Many already knew him as the expelled Black Axe man who had led violent clashes. His reputation brought him instant respect. He wasn't seen as a newcomer but as a warrior returning to battle. Soon he was fully reintegrated into the cult structure. But this time he played a different role. At Uniben, he had been a foot soldier, eager to prove himself. At Obafemi Awolowo University, he became a recruiter and strategist. Efosa began to initiate new students, particularly freshmen who were dazzled by the idea of power, protection, and belonging. The process was brutal, as initiations often were, nights of beating, psychological tests, and oaths of secrecy. To the uninitiated it looked like madness. To the cult it was a rebirth. And Efosa, standing over trembling boys, had become the midwife of this dark transformation. By 1999, one name had begun to trouble the cult landscape at Obafemi Awolowo University: George Akinyemi Awilade, better known as Afrika. A law student in his third year, Afrika was no ordinary undergraduate. He was a leader in the student union, a voice of reason, and above all, a fierce critic of cultism. Afrika organized rallies, wrote petitions, and pressured the school administration to fight cult violence. He believed students had to rise against confraternities, not live in fear of them. His speeches electrified crowds. His courage inspired others. But his defiance also painted a target on his back. For the Black Axe, Afrika was more than a nuisance. He was a threat to their survival. Efosa, who had watched Afrika from a distance, felt his blood boil whenever the young law student condemned the Black Axe in public. To him it was personal. He saw Afrika's activism as an insult to the brotherhood, a challenge that had to be crushed. In mid-1999, Afrika achieved a breakthrough. Working with a coalition of students, he organized night patrols that reported suspicious cult gatherings. He pressured campus security to take action. On one occasion, several suspected cultists were actually handed over to the police, an unprecedented move at the time. For the first time, the balance of fear shifted. Cult members who once walked boldly began to move cautiously. The symbol of this shift was Afrika himself. To many students he was a hero. To the cults he was a marked man. Efosa felt humiliated. How could a single student, a law undergraduate, undermine the Black Axe? His anger grew with each report of Afrika's activism. He believed Afrika had to be taught a lesson, one so severe that it would silence every other anti-cult voice. Thus began the planning of an execution that would shock not only Obafemi Awolowo University, but the entire country. The tension at Obafemi Awolowo University had reached boiling point by late 1999. Students whispered about the inevitable clash between the cults and the growing anti-cult movement spearheaded by George Akinyemi Awilade, Afrika. His name echoed across lecture halls, hostel corridors, and campus rallies. To many, Afrika was a lion who had dared to roar against the darkness. His boldness in organizing students, confronting cult members, and even delivering some into police custody made him a living legend. But legends on Nigerian campuses often attracted execution. Within the Black Axe circle, meetings grew tense. Afrika's influence was threatening not just their image but their survival. Efosa, now a respected and feared figure within the Brotherhood, pushed for decisive action. His argument was blunt. If Afrika was allowed to continue, cultism at Obafemi Awolowo University would crumble. Others hesitated, fearing that executing such a prominent student leader would bring too much heat from authorities. But Efosa was unrelenting. He carried scars of humiliation from his expulsion at Uniben, scars that made him ruthless. To him, this was not only about silencing a critic, it was about reclaiming the fear and respect the Black Axe men demanded. The plan was set. Afrika had to be executed. It was a cold night in 1999 when Efosa and his group of Black Axe brothers set their plan in motion. Armed with axes, machetes, and locally made toys, they moved through the shadows of Obafemi Awolowo University vast campus. Their destination was clear, the student hostel where Afrika often stayed. The attack was swift and merciless. Witnesses later recalled hearing screams that pierced the night, the sound of bullets and the shattering of windows. Students scrambled in terror, diving under beds, jumping through windows, and running into the bush to escape the chaos. Afrika was cornered. Despite his bravery in public speeches, he was no match for the armed cultists that night. Alongside him, other innocent students, unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, were cut down. By dawn, the news had spread like wildfire. Afrika was executed. The university woke up in shock. Students gathered in mourning, their faces pale with disbelief. The fearless activist who had stood up to cults, who had given them hope, was gone. Fear returned with vengeance. Lecturers canceled classes. The administration declared an emergency. Journalists descended on the campus, their cameras capturing blood-stained corridors and terrified students. Across Nigeria, the execution made headlines. OAU was described as a battlefield, its promise of education drowned in blood. But the hitmen did not vanish into legend. The chaos of that night left trails, witnesses, whispers, and evidence. Authorities, under immense pressure, swung into action. The police moved in, raiding suspected cultist hideouts, arresting dozens. Efosa, once untouchable, was finally caught. For the first time in years, he was behind bars, staring at the possibility of a life destroyed. Yet, Nigeria's system was not blind to influence. Efosa's privileged background, his father's connections, and the family's wealth became his salvation. While other suspects languished, Efosa's case took a different turn. Files were delayed. Witnesses became scarce. Eventually, he was released under controversial circumstances. The decision sparked outrage among students and parents. How could a man so feared, so clearly linked to violence, walk free? But to those who understood Nigeria of the late 1990s, The answer was obvious: power, privilege, and corruption. Efosa's parents, ashamed but desperate to protect their son, knew he could not remain in Nigeria. Too many enemies surrounded him. Too many families mourned because of him. Too many students whispered his name with hatred. Quietly, arrangements were made. His father pulled strings, secured documents, and within months, Efosa was sent abroad to continue his education. In the eyes of the public, it was an escape from justice. In the eyes of his family, it was the only way to save their son from the storm he had created. The demise of Africa was not just another cult clash, it was a wound in Nigeria's academic conscience. Across the nation, newspapers carried the story of a brilliant young law student cut down in his prime. His funeral turned into a rallying cry against cultism, with civil society groups, student unions, and even government officials condemning the brutality that had plagued Nigerian campuses for decades. But while the nation mourned, Efosa's life was being quietly rewritten. The Nigerian police, overwhelmed and often compromised, had arrested dozens of suspected cultists after the massacre. Some faced trial, others vanished into the overcrowded prison system. Yet Efosa slipped through the cracks. It was not by accident. His father, with deep ties in government, made sure his son would not rot in a cell. Files disappeared. Witnesses grew silent, either out of fear or because they had been taken care of. Within months, Efosa was on a plane to Europe. His departure was framed as a continuation of his education, but everyone who knew him understood it was exile, a flight from justice, a retreat financed by privilege. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the execution of Afrika left a strange silence at Obafemi Awolowo University. For a time, cult activities slowed, subdued by the massive crackdown. Students mourned, but many also grew too scared to pick up where Afrika had left off. Fear returned to the campus stronger than ever. For the Black Axe, the execution of Afrika was both a victory and a curse. They had silenced their loudest enemy. Efosa, though gone, remained a ghost in conversations. To some, he was a hero of the Black Axe, a warrior who had defended the Brotherhood. To others, he was dangerous, a privileged son who executed without consequence. Efosa was free from Nigerian law, but he was not free from himself. Each lecture he attended, each exam he wrote, felt hollow. His parents believed sending him away had saved him. But in truth, Efosa lived in a new kind of prison, a prison built not of bars but of memory. No matter how far he ran, the blood of Afrika and the innocent students of Obafemi Awolowo University stained his name. This content is for educational purposes only,